Well, look, I'm gonna
I can hear
smash
you
record.
whispering in my ear. Yeah.
I want to whisper in your ear. I want to tell you a story about myself, Laszlo. I just have to smash and recording, so we're pretty go. Because like, I want you to realize that I'm a nice guy. I was actually a good guy back in the day. Like I used to wander around in my garden, hang out with my friends. This is a man called Jimmy, and we used to hang out together and talk about the world. You know, we used to go all about. But something bad started to happen to me. I started to read certain books. I started to perceive. I found this orb in my garden, you know, and I started to look into it and get filled up with this very, very intense energy. I don't know what it was. It brought me to another place. Is the only thing I can say. I don't know what that place was, but it felt like someone was watching me from the other side. I'm not quite sure. I don't know. Have you ever had this experience, Laszlo? Have you?
Well, I think the serpent just got to you, man. I
Yeah.
mean, I've been approached by demonic influence many a time in my life.
Okay, yeah. Well, I don't know what it was, but I started reading these and I started to change. And Jimmy, of course, came and he said, dude, stop. Oh my God, stop. But I was like, no, man, I've got a plan now. I've got a plan. I've got to do something. And I cast him out. I cast him out of the tower and it fell and he tried to save me. And then I went down into my garden and I churned it all up and I turned it into a factory for producing the boyo.
What a beautiful chap on the picture. Who is that, Stefan?
This is a combination between an elf and an orc. So I guess it is what a boyo is, a fallen being with a spark of divine light within him. And he may not look great there, but that's because he's not dressed up. But I pretty soon I sat there with my partner and I said, right, I'm going to dress this up. And I dressed them all up and I prepared for what we're about to do. And I don't know what it was. I thought I'd go against the system, I guess, maybe, or the establishment, or the world. I guess the only way I could describe it properly is the Jargonites and their palace of jargon. I decided we must invade, and I went a bit intense. I went a bit crazy. This thing that got grip of me all those many years ago that I've lost grip of, possessed me, and I had to get woken up by a tribe of horsemen, you know, very, very Hungarian-like, as far as I understand. And they
As it
swooped,
happens.
they swooped down and they had to end the army of boyos and bring us back to our senses. And I guess this is what brings us to where we are now. So I guess I should introduce everybody to Lazo. How you doing, Laz? How's the crack?
Very good, sir. How are you doing? I feel exceptionally Hungarian today.
I
So,
don't think you could feel any other way, considering we just told about the myth of how the Hungarian horse raiders, Attila the Hun and whatnot, came in and ended the war on jargon. I'm not sure if you're the good guys here though or not, because the war on
well,
jargon is important.
yeah, I'm not sure either. I mean, all I can feel is this, like the tear rolling down my face. I think I'm touched by the image. So well done on that, sir.
Okay, no, good to know. Anyway, good to know. I'm here with Laz because Laz was a gentleman who was with us from the very, very start. He showed up on Uberboy very early, and I've met him since, and we've been chatting a lot, and we're working together now, and there's stuff going on behind the scenes. I'm sure plenty of you have talked to Laz in that respect, but we want to do a bit of review of some of the ideas in Ion that have been bouncing around our heads, especially considering the, shall we say, paradigmatic shift that seems to be going on right now, the new paradigm we seem to be entering into, and the new normal, if you will. And it'll be interesting to explore some of these notions and these ideas and see what's going on. But I guess, yeah, you were there from the very, very start, and I think your experience with the boyos and the general boyo experience is something that would be well worth going into, because it's very archetypical, if I was to use those words. And we can talk about something I think a lot of us are going through, which is the struggle, the sort of struggle with nihilism, perhaps, or atheism, or lack of meaning, and then the established foundation Jordan Peterson and people like Jung give us, and then the interesting phenomenon where we kind of have to take a step beyond that. Like, he's obviously out of the scene now, and a lot of boys might have made the mistake of looking at him as like the savior father figure, and he's simply just a good man. He's not like Jesus Christ returned at all. And So instead of getting him to hold our hands, like Jordan Peterson to hold our hands and all this stuff, it's been interesting that I think a lot of what has been going on with the boyos is that we kind of have to go out there and figure it out for ourselves and come to our senses ourselves. And I guess there's something about manning up in that respect, like saying, all right, I'm going to assert I'm going to curiously explore reality and see what I can assert as real and trust my instincts, because no one ever wants you to trust your instincts. You know what I mean? No one ever wants to present you with the truth because they think it'll make you evil or something like that, where it's like, no, I believe I've got a good soul. And if you give me the truth, I'll digest it. Even if it's a bit dark, give me the truth and I'll digest it and bring it forward and do something good with it. So I think
Exactly.
that's a good thing to explore. So any thoughts on that, sir?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this whole Boyo story is unfolding. That's why it's so interesting. That's why it has so much energy. And if you think back, I mean, we spoke about this before, but we've been trying to nail down what Boyoism is, like what's actually happening, because the whole story is crazy in itself. I mean, both you and Jimmy, you had only like a couple hundred subscribers in the beginning, and then you hit on this Ion meme, which actually grew into a meme since. And no one really understood what's actually going on. Like, what is this community forming around it? Why is this so interesting? And boyos were just listening to you two for like 3 hours, riffing on the passing ions, Jesus Christ, and the new ion, all that stuff. And I think why it had so much energy is exactly what you just mentioned. I'm not sure what's in the slides.
Oh,
But
you're gonna like what's in the slides, Hazel. Believe me.
oh, I suspect so. Yeah. But I think it was definitely about, if we need to go back to why it all happened. I can bring a personal example, because how I entered the boyosphere, as you know, was a random Facebook post, and you posted the first Ion lectures, and it was titled Ion, the book that Jordan Peterson was terrified of, or something that. And I just had to click. I just had to see, and I think that was a pivotal moment, because this whole idea of we need to go there, we need to see, we need to boldly explore. I think it's a central idea in what we call boyoism. We don't know exactly what it is, by the way. We're trying to articulate it, but it's definitely a part of it. I'm sure we will talk about this in depth, but these are definitely patterns that I think we recognize that work for the individual. How can you become a more juicy boyo, and also works for society at large. I think we really hit on some of the issues that we have as a society about, not being courageous enough, for example, or not engaging with reality in an open and honest and authentic way. And then because of that, not being able to make the right decisions and actually, step forward in life and becoming who you are, if you will. So there's a lot to unpack there, sir.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we will venture through it and have a decent chat here, because I think the interesting thing, the one that I've always heard people say to me is curiosity kills the cat. And that's such an interesting thing, because it's basically like telling you to shut the fuck up and don't ask questions. And that was always the boyoism thing is clearly a meme. Like, we're just joking. There is no real ideology behind all this stuff. No, there is, trust me. But it's really just a joke. But there is something actually tied into it. The more I joked about, like, the jargon thing was a joke as well. But the more I've joked about it, the more I've realized there's something really deep to it. Like, if you allow your mind to be possessed by jargon, concepts that are not yours, you're very, very controlled. And you are very, very restricted by these things. And you must, melt that stuff and reclaim your jargon for yourself. And it's the same with something like boyoism. I was a joke, but then the more I thought about it, the more I start to realize that it's about youth. It's about the divine child. It's about this idea of the energetic redemptive power of the next generation. Like, I'm sure many people who are following this, they know of the constant whining against boomers. And like, I quite like a lot of boomers, but there is a generational issue where they do actually feel like they're a little bit out of step, considering that we had the internet and they did not. And we could use the internet and go and see whatever we wanted to see. And there's this idea that, like, you're not allowed to be curious, because you'll be bad. You'll make the wrong things. You'll figure out the wrong things. You figure out that maybe not. I'm not a health professional. That eating fats is not as bad for you as first was told, and it might be all right to actually eat some fat. And then a lot of the people I know around me, if I present that idea to them, they'll be like, oh no, fat's evil, it'll give you cholesterol and all this. I mean, like, it's not a very grounded perspective, but it's what they're shoving, but that's what's sort of going out in the collective. And the more you explore, the more you start to find out stuff, the more you start to become different from the collective, from the mass of people. And the mass of people start to kind of talk all the same, and it kind of feels like you're separate, you're an outsider or something like that. And worst of all is that you're pathologized for it, because you're just being curious, you're just like listening to interesting things, and some of it's even helping you. Like with the fat thing, it actually makes you a lot healthier in the long term when you stop eating so much sugar and you start eating a bit more fat. And what that actually starts to do is make people will turn around and tell you to stop talking, stop asking questions, stop thinking for yourself. And you have to learn to shut up and pretend that you're someone you're not. And that actually that's unbelievably difficult spiritually. And then all of this is building up. It's almost like a pathologizing of the youth, of the youthful energy, of curiosity and redemptive power and all this. And that's actually a really hard thing to go through as a young person, But then I start looking into the word ion. The first ever video I put up on my channel was called Ion. Then obviously with Jimmy, we did the Ion series. I start looking into the word Ion, and Ion was the god of redemptive youth for the Greeks. And era is about your era in the sun. It's about your era about being, young and healthy and reproducing at your prime and all this. And when I saw that, I was like, what? What the hell is happening, man? This is so crazy. And I guess this is it. Like I'm laughing about the jargon ideologies and all this, but we don't really represent anything. But I do invest very heavily on this idea that I do trust the youthful instincts. I do believe that people have something quite noble in their spirits. And if you present them with reality as best you can, considering the circumstances, they do tend to digest it quite well. Like there's people are most certainly fallen, but they do have something in them that responds to the truth, if you will. And so I guess that's what we want to work towards, is how I got to that perspective, how you got to that perspective. And I think we're on a very similar wavelength. But before we do that, we must talk about I guess we could say, Laszlo, your previous God, your previous Messiah. I think we can get into this.
Oh, hello there.
Because I think this is the kind of first principle, is this curiosity we had where, people were going against the grain and all that. About 10 years ago, and that's not very long ago, that was about saying, oh, the established conservative Christian culture is all stale and brainwashed NPCs. And this guy Dawkins was ripping them a new one. And everybody would like go on the internet or read his books and listen to this and be like, oh, what a radical. This is what my curiosity brings me to. This is what I represent. So it's quite interesting because he seems very outdated these days. And but he's like the source of such amazing words as memes and stuff like this. So if you have any thoughts,
it happened so quick. Oh yeah, absolutely. And it happened so quick. I remember like I think it was like 4 years ago, maybe even 3. I had a weekend that I spent just binging Richard Dawkins videos. It was like literally doing it instead of masturbation, because that was it. I just enjoyed so much him like destroying those religious idiots. And I completely believed it. And it's not like I was completely lost, in the sense that I think I really tried to be intellectually honest and look into ideas that were still considered to be taboo. But I was still drawn to the ideas of Richard Dawkins, and I really thought that was truth, And it's ridiculous looking at it now, because it's just objectively, as you said, it's so outdated. Even in biology, he is considered to be really outdated.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. The stuff that he wrote in The Selfish Gene, I mean, the core ideas there are not necessarily wrong, but it's objectively outdated. I mean, you can ask also Jimmy. He was a biology PhD until recently, and yeah, it's something that's just not that valid anymore. And also, it's interesting that all those people, including me, who were really into the selfish gene stuff, you kind of draw the line though at the memes, So yeah, the genes, it's all about materialism, and everything above it is ridiculous. And then even the genes, I know people, for example, my father, who says that that's like such a good book, that can really form the basis of my worldview. You know, the meme stuff, that's not really. So even taking that buffet approach to these atheistic atheistic ideas. So yeah, I do feel some nostalgia when I look at this beautiful face on the screen.
Yeah, I'm going to do a bit of bragging now because this is something that I quite like about myself, if I don't say so. maybe I've been too close to the orb again, and I'm starting to get some Nietzschean hubris. But I remember when he was a big thing, you know, like atheist YouTube and all that stuff. I was always on the side of God, you know, and I think a lot of boyos who follow the channel think that I'm like the Nietzschean almost atheist now. Like I'd be nearly the closest you're going to get to an anti-Christian, even though that's not really what I believe. But you know, I would be happy to criticize Christianity and all this. And maybe we can talk about that because this used to be a big thing, like cringy kind of atheism. And then it's kind of swung now really to like almost ideological Christianity at the moment. That's the very, very big movement I see right now. But I found myself in a very interesting middle because back when this was happening, I remember loads of conversations I'd had with people, and I'd be on the side of like God or something like that, or spirituality or something like that. I remember I was always naturally into that stuff, and a lot of the way I talk to people is stuff like they'd say, oh, you know, emotions, love is just chemicals, or evolution has no point, the entire world is meaningless, and these were really common memes that were going around to talk about it. These were really, really common, really, really powerful, and everywhere, and everybody had them. And I don't think people were able to, like, even Dawkins himself has admitted that, you know, we should be culturally Christian, which is just a very, very convenient way of saying, oh shit, I don't know, I want to put the beast back in the bag, you know. But it's such an interesting one because he represents that sort of demoralization of the spirit, the very, very big moment where all of us would have grown up with like a bleak atheistic outlook, and that's the world has no meaning and no purpose and all that stuff. And I think the effects that comes, and you've described it best, I think, is the idea that you can get away with anything, you know. And yes, I definitely believe this, and I definitely suffer from this. And I do think that if you have this meme in your head, when you read someone like Nietzsche, that's what you start to believe. I think that's the common understanding of Nietzsche. Oh, he's just like philosopher for you can do whatever you want. And I can understand why people believe that. And he's like the foundation for it as well, is that, you know, you can get away with it, and you can, you know, shall we say, be sexually imprudent, and there will be no consequences. And that really primed everybody for what I think Jordan Peterson came along with, which is like responsibility, man. But before we get into that, I'd love for you to just talk about that, because I think you talk about it the best. Because you were in London, you had a killer job, you were making loads of cash, you had the girls flowing towards you, and then I guess that's when it started to hit a little bit. So tell me what you think.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I came from Hungary. I was in the army in Hungary, military academy for 3 years. And then I just really felt this compulsion to break out of that mold and then see the world. And the West itself had this pull, you know, that the truth is in this cosmopolitan way of being. And I was also fed up with the restrictions that were imposed on me in the army. And I really thought that this was the promised land, you know, economic prosperity, freedom, whatnot. So I set sail, I came here to London and really started to live that dream. And basically, I think it was just a continuation of the paradigm that I was living my life with since my childhood, really, where it wasn't really rooted in anything objectively moral, if you will, or anything objective. Anything that I did was basically my own decision, and I wasn't really anchored in anything. There weren't really borders, you know. And I used to lie a lot, for example, growing up, and it's not like I was malicious or anything with the lies, but I didn't have any restrictions around it either. And when I came to London, I just found that you can actually be, you know, pretty successful just living your life like that. And all I needed to do is basically to step in line and go with the program. And I was rewarded for it, to be honest with you, both financially in a materialistic way, And you know the landscape now in terms of the relationship between men and women. It's definitely the case now that 20% of men get 80% of women. And I could just lean into it. I was really, I think, given the opportunity to see what that actually means, how that life actually looks like. And what I really arrived at pretty quickly is that it was, I know it might be a cliche, but it is hollow, and it will bring you to places where you didn't think that you'll ever go, and you don't find anything meaningful there. So I was all ready to receive the Jordan Peterson style, not ideology, but those ideas themselves. I was already receptive because I just couldn't find what I was looking for. I tried, let's say, spirituality with yoga and Zen Buddhism, because I kind of felt like that this way that I'm living now, where I can just get away with everything, long term, it's not giving me the results that I want, or results that are beneficial to me objectively. I started to kind of see that. And then with Jordan Peterson, the first moment was I was listening to the Sam Harris podcast, which I loved, and I loved his content, read all his books. He really provided this intellectual anchor. I thought that, okay, finally there's a man who's intellectually honest. And I really bought into that worldview. Even when he talked about spirituality, it's spirituality without religion, which I don't even know what that means, but I bought into it. And when he was interviewing Jordan Peterson, that was the first time I heard someone being at least as articulate as him. Mm-hmm. And then I followed up with the Joe Rogan podcast, in which Peterson suddenly said that that's why I'm deeply religious. Mm-hmm. And that was like a wake-up call to me. Yeah. I was like, what? How can he be religious? He seems to be, pretty educated, pretty aware of what's going on. And that started me on that path. But if I look back, again, I was just all ready for being some responsibility put on me and some restrictions to be put on me, because deep down, intuitively, I could feel that I was really heading in the wrong direction, even though, again, on the surface, with regards to material wealth and success and worldly pleasures, I should have been happy and content, but I wasn't. And I know that I'm not the only one. Mm-hmm. And with Peterson's ideas, I started to engage with cultural Christianity. I was more open to it now because he did take an angle and an approach that was new, that was novel. And then I think we just actually hit a roadblock where the remedy was boyoism itself, boyoism itself. And just to comment on boyoism, by the way, I don't know if you remember how that came to be. It wasn't like you just said, hey, let's come up with the name for this. You just, I think you just called maybe Jimmy Boyo once, and it just stuck. It just had all this energy built up in it. And then we started to slowly articulate through the story what boyoism actually means. And Ion is a perfect example of why it started with Ion, because it's about, if you think about it, it's about breaking paradigms. It's about breaking an existing fallen worldview, because it's like a crazy fantasy novel at the end of the day. Ion itself. And it breaks their conception of the world of, okay, this is it. This is the sandbox that you're allowed to play in, the selfish gene materialistic way. And no, it's actually the ions and Aquarius and Jesus Christ and these ideas clashing, and just breaks that paradigm, really.
Yeah. There's so much I want to talk about there as well. Sam Harris, I know you're a disciple of Sam Harris. Maybe you are still secretly, for all we know. You're just churning through stuff. I think Sam is actually quite a decent thing. He's interesting enough to listen to, and he does seem like he does do intellectual honesty. I think someone confronted him on veganism, and considering the first principle of well-being, he actually admitted he should be a vegan or something like that. So I'll give him that. But the critique I'd have of Sam, that I think, and it's not really a critique, it's not like, destroying Sam Harris. It's more just something I'd like to point out that I think tells more of the story than almost anything else, is I guess the bland Harris meme. The fact that when Sam talks, it's very, very passionless. If you imagined Sam Harris, and maybe I shouldn't be imagining this, but if you imagine him, making love or something like that, it'd be very, even with his voice, it seems very, very, very.
I do it all the time.
Yeah. It feels very stale and sterile. And you think about the life that goes on around that. That is like you in the East, you coming from the East, from the steppes, had this vision of the West as free and liberal and romantic. I know a lot of people have that, but when you get here, it gets a little bit sterile. You know, you realize that like the abundance of hedonism, I guess, actually ends up in a very, very severe amount of sterility. Like everything is bland, everything is drab, everything is boring. Like so often when if you're with someone who you don't really know, it kind of like, you know, the sex is awkward and stuff like this. Or even if you're in the city and you're there because you want to get like loads of girls on Tinder and all this, and then you tend to not put up quite the numbers that you're expecting. Or even worse, you get plenty of numbers, but you realize that if you had a girlfriend, you'd have like just as much sex, that type of thing. And there's these very, very interesting almost like, you know, Faustian bargains where a lot of it turns out to be flipped on its head, and all the opportunity and freedom and formlessness and potential to do anything ends up undermining everything and making it sterile and passionless. Like that's really what I describe it as above everything, is that it's an American dream. It's a romantic ideal, but it feels very passionless when you actually play the game. You know, it's very, very isolated and alienated, these type of things. And obviously coming from the post-Soviet Eastern Europe, it's extremely cynical over there about what went on. But I guess that's almost like you've faced your shadow. It feels like we're a little bit naive and we haven't done this. And so that sterility is a very, very interesting idea, because it's tied to the unrestricted nature of what Sam and Richard proposed as the way forward. And there's this thing in artistic circles where it's like restrictions breed creativity. Like Laszlo, if you say to me, write a novel, any novel, I might go insane because I have so many possible ideas. But if you say to me, write a novel in 4,000 words, well, then that actually gives me the opportunity to be creative within that boundaries, you know? And then what happens is the more you realize that like restrictions are actually extremely useful. They're actually extremely good, extremely positive. And when you start laying boundaries down, when you start laying limits for you to express yourself, this actually becomes quite helpful. It becomes a way of channeling yourself. And if you have a conception that reality is like formless and you can do anything with it, that becomes very, very hard for you to do. But if you establish a reality, if you say, all right, there's a reality out there I can adapt to that has limits and all this stuff, or has rules or has restrictions of some sort, this gives you this immense power to actually be productive and have a meaningful and passionate existence in all this. And so Jordan Peterson really comes across with that. And I noticed this with like the way Sam talks. He's very kind of like this, and he really, you know, might seduce you with a glass of wine, but I just really don't know about it. Whereas Jordan almost sounds like he's a violinist who's playing really slowly, like he's really trying to like woo you. Now he's not like a singer-songwriter who's up there and singing kind of pretty songs. He's actually sitting there like playing this really deep, moving classical music, and you know that he would love you so deeply, and it'd be so passionate and so meaningful and all that. And there's something really, really powerful in the way he talks. He has that presence. It's quite serious. I think everything that goes on over here on Uber Boyo and all this is a lot more lighthearted and got a different energy. Maybe that's the youth in it. But Jordan had that very, very heavy and passionate idea. And the thing that was so interesting is he had that passion, he had that depth, that sort of slow violinist style, combined with the idea that the song he was playing was about the entire meaning of our civilization and the restrictions imposed on us to appreciate that, to appreciate what the West is and all this and what it should be, and notice that it can be lost, like what happened in the USSR. It can just vanish overnight if you're not careful and whatnot. And I think that was the really, really big paradigm. I think that was the really, really big paradigm shift that obviously everybody went through. And everybody I talk to brings up this man. Like, he had a huge effect. I know and this is interesting, I have loads of criticisms of him. And I was sort of said a couple of them maybe a year ago or something like that. But now it's popular to kind of go against him. So I'm like, you know, I'm like the hipster here, being like, I was criticizing him before school. But now I can actually see his value a bit more now. Now I see he's actually a good dude and he did some brilliant things. And it was really our mistake to turn him into a messiah, and now everybody's mad at him because that happened. And now it's perhaps what I guess the boyos were doing, what we were trying to do, what I was trying to do, what everybody was trying to do, which is take the steps beyond him, because he sort of took you to a certain point up the mountain, but then he said, I have to go and I've got some shit I need to sort out myself over here in the bush. And then he went off, and that kind of like left us alone, if you will.
But he opened the gate. So he opened that gate. And if I think about, by the way, and this is a brilliant point, I haven't thought about this before, but the thing that was the most compelling was probably the contrast between two individuals, as you said, because it felt like Peterson had a beating heart, you know?
Yes.
And Harris had like kind of a dry heart of stone in a way. Yeah. And you could only see that with the contrast. And that's where also by this whole secular humanism thing falls apart, is that it has no soul. It has nothing in its center, neither actually an actual human being or God, because a human being has a soul. That's also kind of like a taboo, you know, that you can't really talk about in scientific terms. But if you think about what we talk about in the biosphere, for example, getting soul pilled, how important it is to get soul pilled. What does it even mean? You know, but it does have a meaning. It does have an energy in it. And I think ultimately, the secular humanistic, scientific, materialistic frame just doesn't have a place for the human soul. And that's the problem. And without Peterson coming and saying that, hey, by the way, you have a soul, he actually represented it. And he gave us the permission, actually, I think, to go there. You know,
I think what he did, which is so brilliant, is he gave us the permission to care about things. Like, you know, like it was kind of all right to be like, all right, you know, these deep ideas matter. And it was this very, very interesting rebellion against the established atheist thing for us. And that's a brilliant way to put it, is that when you're listening to someone like Sam, it does sound like you're a computer talking. Like it does sound like a machine reasoning to you. And there does seem to be very little life in it, you know? And then even when he talks about stuff, I think the most telling moment of the conversation Sam and Jordan had, which just proved, like, is the illustration of everything I'm talking about. Douglas Murray turned around to him and said, what do you consider evil? What do you consider dangerous? Well, you could say a negative thing. Talk to me about something very dark. And Jordan actually like went in and started to talk about his fantasies of, you know, being in the Holocaust and being you know, one of the capo or something like that, or one of the officers, and actually just murdering people and all this. And he talked about that, and he said, I know that's in me. And you could tell he meant it. And it was like this really heavy moment. And then when it passed over to Sam, I can't even remember his answer, because it was just so poorly. There was so little emotion in it. There was so little depth in it. There's so little passion in it. He was trying to reason something that it almost sounded like the way people try to say news clips, so they sound good. And it showed not that he was trying to do that, it was that he literally had never opened the back of his mind into the shadowy world and actually went down into the dark parts, which give you a lot of the weight, you know, give you a lot of the gravitas, give you a lot of all that type of stuff. And so I think that's really what Jordan, as you said, opened the gate and left us the possibility too. And that was something, as I said before, I'm painting myself as the noble boyo, but I noticed that when I was, there was a lot of Richard Dawkins heads around me, that I was always trying to point towards something like this. And I was always called a religious thinker. I find that so interesting. This is someone who was reading Nietzsche and Jung at the time. Maybe Jung, but Nietzsche, you know, people were calling me like religious. They were associating me with Christianity because I was going against the grain. And that's absolutely fascinating, is that you almost can't be an individual in the frame of the collective malaise, if you will. You can only be seen as the opposite, as the evil, as the shadow in some sense. Like that's such a validation of that Jungian term. And then I guess what the boyos were doing is realizing the need for people to actually go there, or maybe not all people, but some people need to go there themselves and figure this stuff out. And they usually evolve. They usually go on to be thought leaders. Like I think we hopefully we'll see some very, very juicy boyos come out of this and set the agenda for whatever paradigm comes next, because they've been given the permission to be curious and to use their head, if you will. You know, because as I said, there's no real ideology here. It's just taking what Jung, Peterson, and all of them, and Nietzsche and all of them, and just taking it a step further and being like, look, this is the best I can give you about thinking for yourself. And that actually involves you feeling for yourself. Like there is actually an emotional side to this that is so overlooked. And And that's really what I kind of see it as. It was about saying, all right, go dive in yourself, go into the terrifying book and explore it. And most people would be refused to talk about young Zion because it seemed like a, you know, like if you want to call it a conspiracy theorist, it's the conspiracy theorist that Satan rules reality. Yeah, okay, right, we'll go with that. And it's permission to say, all right, let's steel man this, let's give it its due, let's see where it takes us, this type of stuff. And that actually is very empowering, because then you realize that you're able to like face something crazy, something mind-bending, and it bent my mind, and you know, be all right, you know, and actually being able to make decisions and come out pretty decent on the other end. So before I dive into it, any thoughts on that?
Yes, absolutely. Because now I think about why I was drawn to Sam Harris. And it wasn't just this hyper intellectual, articulate way of talking about things, but I think ultimately it was because I did perceive him as someone who is breaking taboos, because he was, I mean, he was kind of a mainstream intellectual, but he was talking about stuff like, you know, immigration or even veganism. He was talking about religion in a way that I didn't encounter anywhere else. But it was a little bit suspicious to me, just like as a short anecdote that you already alluded to, with regards to veganism. So he talked a lot about veganism, like what should we eat? What's a moral way to be? He was always trying to explore that. And he arrived at the conclusion that, yes, I mean, based on my conclusion, now we need to be vegan. And he tried to be vegan, but he said that I felt weak, I felt enervated, I felt lifeless. So I actually gave that up. And I felt like he's never taking that step. And I wasn't really against veganism at the time. I was genuinely interested in where this leads, you know, where this line of argumentation leads. But you see, the step that he failed to make was actually, why do I need to feel full of life? You know, why do I need vitality? You know, and he actually, with his actions, he did say that I'm not going to be a vegan and I'm going to eat meat, but he didn't go there in the end. You know, because probably the realm that he needed to enter was the realm of beauty and art, you know, which only human beings are capable of creating, you see?
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. That's a brilliant point. I never even thought of that, but that's such a brilliant diagnosis of the man himself. Because he does seem like he does genuinely seem like he's trying his best, you know, but
Exactly.
It's almost like the problem is not his reason. His reason is sharp, but it's, as you said, it's the paradigm, it's the first principles that he cannot even see. And that big first principle is like, you know, it just exposes itself in such gentle little places. I remember I had a girlfriend and she wanted me to go vegan or vegetarian, sorry. And I said, yes, as long as my vitality does not suffer. And that's interesting, because the more I thought about that, I realized, oh my God, that is a essential first principle. Health is an essential first principle, almost religious in its depth. And I actually think it is. And even Jordan Peterson going with his like carnivore diet, he didn't really build a morality out of that, but that's a signal that he was taking that stuff serious. There's something he valued in that. And it's interesting how that changed him as well. He started to like show up more handsome and whatnot. And I guess with the boyoism, like we dived into a lot of stuff. We dived into like radical Jungian theory and all this, and then a lot of us got really deep into the logos and that idea of logos as this fundamental, the idea that there's a reality out there that you can adapt to. And that was such a huge idea. And I've talked about it ad infinitum about the idea of music. And you can find it in pagan Greek culture or Christianity. I don't really care. It's there in both. It's a big deal. And I think that was so interesting to me, because that started to present the idea that there's a reality out there. And if you obey that reality, if like a musician, you dance with that reality, you produce vitality, you produce beauty, you produce health. And if you talk about an ideology, like that's the closest we're ever going to get to it, because that's not something like, that's not like, you know, the Communist Manifesto. It's not like, you know, Mein Kampf. It's not like one of these like, you know, here's the book, accept the book and all that. It's actually an emotion. It's a feeling, you know, it's almost like, I want to feel like this, you know. And this is so interesting, because this shows it like a vibrant first principle. And I guess this is what started to appear in Jordan, is he was closer to a vibrant first principle than Sam was. Even though maybe Sam was even better at arguing than him, Jordan was grabbing onto something of a vibrant first principle. And I think it's almost like the noble honor and responsibility towards the past. And that actually is such a big idea that it empowered him and gave him that violinist power. It filled his spirit with something. And he made him have that presence and all that. And the more I've spent time with this type of stuff and explored stuff and looked at all the different ideologies that are out there and played around with them, whatnot, and explored them and gone into stuff like Christianity, gone into the radical, like, people talking about Europe and nationalism and all that stuff. And there's something to all of this stuff that needs to be taken into account. But fundamentally, I guess my question has always been about the religious stuff, like what's going on. Even actually, I should say, like even the left-wing liberalism, like I do think there is something to this type of things and things worth noting about all this stuff. And then when you explore it all, I realized that the thing I'm looking for is sort of pseudo-religious, because I'm coming at this in a very artistic perspective. And the thing that I've noticed is exactly what you're saying, is someone like Sam, who doesn't seem like a bad dude. It does seem like he's not in touch with his soul, his deep soul. And a little glimmer of the vitality question is the I guess you could say the big fire in his soul that he realizes must be a light for him to be a good being. And he's like, good is some type of intellectual concept to him, like it is for everybody else, I've noticed, or most other people. But good can actually just be like your ability to burn brightly in your heart. And when you're happy in that way, you tend to be just, I don't know, nicer in the way that people understand that as moral. And that's something I really started to understand, is that like that's something in me that needs to be cultivated. I need to, like when I'm creating, that burns brighter in me and I'm giving off better energy. When I'm eating well, it's the same thing. And that's fundamentally what you want for people. You want people to feel this. And it's very hard because not everybody gets this. Actually, maybe even a minority get this. The same with the idea of not everybody can think for themselves. But if we were to present to people a perspective that might be helpful for them to use as a first principle to carry them through life, I think this is the closest we're going to get to it. I don't know, do you have any thoughts on all that?
Oh, dude, this is so good because we arrived at aesthetics. And again, the whole boyo project, I think it is interesting and exciting because it's an unfolding drama, and only in retrospect we can actually draw the conclusions and extract out like the first principles. And at the same time, we were really bold, I think, with leaning into these ideas. If you think back to the early days, we were like butting heads even on veganism and a carnivore way of being, and going extremes on both, and bringing the arguments. But where did we find the resolution? You need to be healthy, you need to be vital, you need energy. But why? Because it needs to be in the service of beauty. Same thing if you think about the clash between the hardcore Christian view and the might of Rome. That was a whole phase in boyoism. So you see, again, that was a story. I think it was spectacular to see. It was spectacular to live through. It was full of passion. But we were really stretching the boundaries on both. Where did we find the resolution? Where did we find a common ground? Beauty and aesthetics and health and vitalism. And
can I just put a brief note on that, because I think that really does describe what's going on, because like I even got ideological during talks about this. So a big talk for everybody listening is that Nietzsche's perspective is that Christianity was a mistake, and I'm not even sure if that's correct to say that's Nietzsche's perspective. People have this often problem where they reduce what he says to something they can easily understand, but
it's more nuanced.
It's definitely, but you roll with certain ideas, and it's like, all right, Christianity was a complete mistake for the European people, and we should go back to Rome and go back for a Roman Renaissance and all this. And you can get caught up in that, and then I'd meet other people who are like, Christianity is the reason why the West is falling, or things are bad in the world or whatever. And so what we need to do is completely reject everything else and go like full authoritarian Christian or something like this. Or maybe that's steel man and what they're saying. Sorry, straw man and what they're saying.
Well, I did post some videos in the Discord about how mindfulness meditation invites demons. So I did go pretty far with that, I needed to counteract the opposite position.
And there you go. And that's sort of it. And these two things got really, really extreme. And then the more we kind of bit at each other, and we got very ideological. And I don't think it's actually bad to get ideological and attack, as long as you realize that you're able to have sort of this intellectual, emotional intelligence where you can attack and attack and attack, and then eventually like let go. And let your side fall and all this stuff, and do these things like steel man the other side. And I remember doing this for a while with people, and eventually I started to see that whole idea of, well, what was in Rome was the logos, and what was in Christianity was the logos, and it shared between the two of them. and it's shared between all other cultures. Like ancient Judea had it in the Old Testament, and the Japanese had it in all this. Like this was always there, and this forms this like universal center that's actually there for you in this age. And you're not going to be able to go back to Rome and go back to Christianity and live like you're, you know, in the medieval times, or live like you're in ancient Rome. You don't. You live in a new ion. But that eternal reality of, like, I don't know, stabilized logos, if you will, is still there, and you can access it now and adapt to it now. And that really sets us up for what I want to talk about in the next section. But that was like a huge idea for me that completely allowed me to drop all this really silly ideology that was kind of catching me up and whatnot. And as I'm saying, it's okay to explore that. I guess this is the thing. I want people to have the permission to explore this stuff, but they also have to have the emotional intelligence to be able to let it go when the time comes. And it does bring you to something. It's like Hegel. We had the thesis and the antithesis, maybe Rome and Christianity, or the other way around. And the opposites united, and then you got the meta thesis, and that really formed a firm foundation, because I find I can talk to pretty much anybody about this stuff, and they're sort of like, yeah, I'm down for that, whatever that is. Like, I'm down for that. Like, let's make it happen. And this is what you start to see then, is that ideology is fundamentally unpragmatic. Very Nietzschean idea. He said Apollo and Dionysus, ideology and pragmatism, you know. And he said, look, you can have your perfect belief all you want, but what we need to do is get our people, get us, and then our team, and then our boyos to this point where there's a lot of vitality in their lives. And that's not easy to do. And the question actually is more pragmatic. How does that get achieved? All right. So once you've kind of figured out your head a little bit, and you see that, all right, well, here's a decent goal. How do we get there? And that's when all these religious traditions start to become a lot more interesting, because they all have a coherent way of achieving it. So any thoughts, sir?
Exactly. Now, so this is so interesting, because if you look at Ion, and what is the end of that story is that the age of Aquarius will come, which is about unifying opposites. And again, Ion itself, I think it was compelling, not because of the facts that it was presenting. It did a pretty good job at that, but it was a beautiful story. It was a spectacular story, and it was spectacular to sit through it and be a part of it. And something else that might be a taboo that we can talk about in the boyosphere is actually like the existence of good and evil, the actual presence of good and evil, good taking shape and evil taking shape. How did they look like? And if you think about it, this whole idea of unifying opposites or integrating, synthesizing ideas, Satan itself, we talk about Satan a lot, you know, sometimes jokingly, sometimes half jokingly, sometimes not so much, but Satan and what he stands for is diabolos, the original Greek word. It is the divider. He divides things, you see? And then that's entropy, falling apart, pulling apart, conflict. And boyoism, as it is, it stands for bringing things together, even through conflict, you know, boldly stepping into that and really unifying these things that are seemingly in opposition and in conflict through a lot of, you know, sweat and blood. I mean, even you and I went at it pretty hard, you know, over the year, but it was a lot of fun, but it did have some sort of a tangible outcome. So just something to think about as well, because even Peterson can't really talk about evil in that way, or he wasn't willing to, you know. He opened the door for it, but boyoism is about, okay, actually step into it and then paint a picture about it, actually grapple with it in a more intimate way, I think.
Yeah. I guess that's something like to just expand on the idea of the ions, to complete the thought that I was just bringing up, is that, yes, like there was all this ideology. I feel like Richard Dawkins and all that represented the lowest point of demoralization, where no one believed in anything. No one believed in the future, the worst thing. Nietzsche's Last Man had reached its zenith. No one believed in the future. And of course, I don't think we're not in a good place in that regards. Like, a lot of people still don't. But then Jordan comes along and says, you know, you can believe in something, you know, there is things out there that are worthy, and there are restrictions attached to that, and that is healthy and responsibility, yada, yada, yada. And then obviously we're just like, all right, I want to explore and have fun and do crazy stuff and look at all the crazy ideas and entertain every possibility and see where it takes us. And that leads us to this like massive conflict of almost like, should it be like Romano paganism, LARPing Renaissance, or should it be like hardcore pious Christian 15th century Amish lifestyle, or what's going on? And then obviously we have this unification, a presentation of the established order, the established order in the world that always exists is something you can adapt to and you must follow in some sense. That's a really interesting idea, and I like it. And then it becomes quite interesting when we're talking about this idea that maybe Rome was appropriate for Rome, Christianity as the form it took was appropriate for the time it took, and even there was a little bit of Rome in Christianity. That's another thing to keep in mind. So these things almost like always integrate and then go into the future, almost like unified together in a weird way. And so now we're at that point, as you said, of like putting everything together. It's almost like we're folding all that stuff together into the ion. So of course you had Rome, and it was defined by the tactic of war. What made you great in Rome was the fact that you could fight with organization and your fist, and Mars and Aries. And that was really what it was all about. And the astrological symbol Aries was the definer of this. And then the new era came where it was about community organization in some sense. Like as much as having an army mattered in these times, if you couldn't keep your population somewhat satisfied, they were likely going to overthrow you. And as Christ said, the new ion was about the first shall be last and the last shall be first. The leader of the group, at the best part, has to be the lover of the group, the person who obeys the group. The group is almost bigger than the leader in a very interesting way. And that's an unbelievably important, sophisticated and powerful idea. And as much as you want a purity spiral about the poor old Romans and their elite hierarchy and all that, like you want this. If you're on the internet talking about this stuff, you're probably not at the top of the elite hierarchy. So you should probably pay a bit more attention to this one, these type of things. And then lastly comes what's going on now. And this is quite interesting because the age of Aquarius is the age of tech. And this is very, very appropriate if you look around what's going on right now, is that the old saying, how warfare works now in the modern age is very much related to who has the electronic power, who is the technological power, who's the Iron Man. That's Iron Man is actually a good symbol for this. And that's the new source of power. And the most interesting source of power is the mind. It's almost like the Christian idea of the understanding the community is now turning into like controlling the community. And whoever has the biggest possession of the human mind, whoever has the most whoever's memes get into the most people's minds is the ones who win in some sense. And that's really what it seems like we're moving into, is this sort of idea of like, the superordinate media system or something like that. That's becoming the big Aquarian energy. And whoever decides what shows up in the media, it decides what shows up in the mind. And there is actually a very big question about good and evil that I think is becoming quite interesting regarding the vitality thing, is that in some sense, the Aquarian, if an Aquarian system, if an Aquarian media system, tech system is not promoting vitality, what is it promoting? What use is it? It's dangerous, actually. It's almost like the way the church could get pathologized. Like obviously Christ was a glorious being, but I don't know, was the priest raping a child a glorious being? And that was used to subvert the church. But there's a good argument there being like, how can we trust this type of institution? And it's not like something like that hasn't happened with the media. Like the whole Epstein thing is a pretty big deal. And then you've got these things going on. And so now you have these very, very serious questions. Is like, all right, well, this is the age that's going into it. What do I plug myself? What matrix do I plug myself into? It becomes quite interesting. And everybody's looking for an ideology. Everybody's looking for a way. Everybody's looking for maybe a technological set of habits and all this stuff. And I guess the question now will be, I'm not quite sure how it's going to go down, but it might be about understanding something that offers us vitality through its memes, through its habits, through its ways, through the things that it perpetuates. Maybe instead of getting sucked into like a Pornhub, Tinder, like I don't know, social media, brainwashing, mental health destroying monster meme, Aquarius, I don't know, whatever, you would look towards something that's more empowering, more ennobling, more enriching, that gives you better truths and all this. And that's something I've been thinking about a lot. I think this is going to be the definition of the new age, is that, all right, in Rome we had war, and now we have something like mental, spiritual war, if you will. And then that's becoming a really, 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 really big question. So that's literally the end. That's literally all I wanted to talk about today. I don't want to LARP on this stuff too much. I wanted to give people a broad overview. But before we wrap it up, I'd love to know if Lazo had any thoughts.
Oh, definitely. I'm one of my favorite movies of all time is 300. You know, I watched it as a teenager. I think I was 16. We went to the theater. We sat through it. Before that, by the way, I think I watched the trailer like literally like 150 times. For some reason, it really struck a chord. And that was the first movie where when it finished, we walked out, bought another ticket, and went back in. You know, there was just like so much energy in it. And I don't know why it spoke to me so deeply. I remember I teared up in the at the movies like twice, you know, and I think because Leonidas really represented what we're talking about ultimately, because he was a king. He really gave up his life in the service of an ideal, okay, but he did it in a way where he was as practical as it gets. So he really submitted himself to the law. You know, this dude with the six-pack, everyone is kneeling down before him, but he does submit himself before the law. That's like a deep, deep message about humility. And at the same time, he led like the most effective fighting force in history, knowing that he will die. So everything was, you know, kind of charged up and packed up in it. And I think it serves as a great example for us boyos. It has a lot of energy in it. But even if you think about, for example, Christ, the idea of Christ, if you disassociate that from the institutions that Christianity created, or even the societal and cultural structures that came after Christ, he is kind of the archetype of a rebel, because he was a radical, and he is still a radical 2,000 years later. He really stands for breaking these paradigms and revealing stuff, like revealing the truth at all costs. This is also one of the reasons I think why we started to look up to Jordan Peterson, because what we found from our own fathers is that they are not really doing that. That their generation did give away and give up our heritage through not looking at the lies, not being willing to reveal the truth. And with boyoism as well, we do this all the time. I think this is also something that we can agree on apart from the first principles of beauty and aesthetics. It's about exposing things. It's about revealing things and then trying to wrestle with the consequences. But still, it's about shining a light on the lies and the deception. So that's really it, because I think this is where we are now as a society as well. This is where we find ourselves, that there are all these deceptions popping up all over the place, including this tech dream that they have for us, you know, that this will be the Messiah. This is the future. This is how we will be redeemed through this weird technological dream, your mind being integrated into some computer, or maybe going to Mars. But we start to feel that it is not true. And this is why we are reaching to these archetypes, including Christ and also the Greek gods as well, because they do promise something more. You know, you don't need to take for granted the idea of the afterlife, but you can actually look at it like there is something beyond this fallen world. And I think the whole Boyo project, what we found is that a way to reach that, and surefire way to reach something beyond yourself, is through beauty and aesthetics and forms and vitality. That's all I think on my end. And I think Steph is speaking to his agents. He's asking if it's cool to comment on that.
Hello. Yeah, sorry. I was getting giving me lunch orders actually. So
Yeah.
sorry about that, lads.
I was just saying that it was probably your agents. Just, you know, you were checking with them. That am I allowed to comment on that?
They came in. They said, "You're not talking about Nietzsche again, are you?"
Like, no.
No,
It's cool.
I hate him. I who? What's going on? No, man. No. I'm talking about I don't know, like
I don't even know what we were talking about. Not Nietzsche, okay?
What's
not
safe
Christ
to
and
talk
Nietzsche.
about these days? what's safe to talk about? We're talking about the New York Times or something. I don't know, something like that.
I know what they're saying, but we were talking about the New York Times.
So what was on the New York Times? I just go away. So what you were talking about is the idea of that dream that's getting offered towards in the tech world and all that. And I look, there's something definitely to technology, but it's almost like our culture as a whole, or maybe the leading ideals of our culture has not faced its shadows. So we are very materialistic, and what we believe is that we need to follow this materialism into creating a materialistic paradise, and that's going to solve all our problems. And our biology is evil. Our biology is the thing that holds us back. And I see this even in people who get into this sphere, people who would be very anti-tech, but they still have the same problem. They think that they can get past biology. Like, you get a lot of people who come into the mental health sphere, get into Jung, and they think they can just skip over the reality that if you have bad diets, you're going to have a lot harder of a time fixing your mind than anything else. And then in various other fields and whatnot, artists are the exact same as well. If you're going to be an artist, you think that you're going to produce great art without being at least decently healthy, and you actually could, but you'll notice that what's going on now is that you have a lot of very unhealthy people producing art, and the art is actually starting to get sort of nightmarish or something like that. It's very, very weird. It's tied to the spirituality as well. These things are all connected in some sense. And so we have a movement that's pushing us towards, the transhuman idea and all this. And it's trying to escape the problem. And we're trying to turn around and face the problem and be like, you're unhappy because your body is broken. And you can actually fix that, And then the more you go along with that, the more you see that the solution starts to rise all the way up to the stars. That when you invitalize yourself, you start to make statues of yourself, celebrating your beauty and pride. And then people come for thousands of years afterwards and just walk around in awe of what you've achieved. And this is the unification of technology and biology and health. It's a spiritualization of the fallen world. And if you applied that to the tech sphere, imagine what you could do with technology if you had a noble, creative human endeavor going into it. And that's a fascinating thing. But what happens is these systems that seem to have consolidated around us are populated by this very, very negative energy, very, very, very unvital, And maybe it's because the people leading it lack that, because they're trapped in the same void we are. And we're sort of kind of breaking out of that and being like, all right, I just don't want, whatever it is, I just don't want that. And how do we move away from that? And look, I don't have a solution to everything, but I do think that what I'd be interested in is in something in terms of me putting out art that represents this feeling a lot better, because this feeling is this is a feeling thing. Vitality is a feeling, and I think it's starting to lack. I think it's something that really, really lacks. And so that's one of my big interests going forward. I guess that's going to be my corner of doing what boyos do, and God knows what else will show up out of it. But that's really where my head at is in regards to all that stuff. And it's really a lovely little conclusion, or not conclusion, but wrapping up of that big journey that we went through. And I'm sure there's way more that's going to go down over the next couple of years. Things have only just started getting interesting in the last couple of months. So let's see how this stuff plays out, because you'll notice that our crisis is not necessarily any or normal crisis. It's actually a health crisis. So keep an eye on that meme, that bit of jargon, and see how it's played around with. In the meantime, myself and Laz, we're going to be doing obviously some talks here. I'll be doing loads of talks about all these topics as usual, but we want to talk as well really specifically about stuff like anxiety and mental health, and obviously health in general, and just general juiciness over on the Boyocast channel as well. So we're going to do a part 2 of this. And if you're interested in checking that out, I'll leave the link in the description and the top pinned comment, and you can pop over and hear us rip into the details of anxiety and how that relates to the idea of overthinking, and how that relates to the idea of Sam Harris's rational ego detached from his soul, and what exactly that means in terms of Jungian theory and right brain, left brain, and all that stuff. And we'll rip into that in depth, and we'll talk to you about some of our experience working with boyos in that, and you'll find it immensely juicy. And then I guess the last thing I can say, Laszlo, is thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed, and any last questions or thoughts or ideas?
Thank you, sir. No, absolutely. I think with all this big picture stuff, I think also one of the conclusions that we arrived at is, once you have that nailed, once you have your direction. We were talking about this, right? Like decide, commit, invest. This kind of holy trinity. Well, first of all, if you don't see reality as it is, then what are you making your decisions on? You can't really step forward. So that's the first step, and then you need to commit. That's the idea of the ideal. You need an ideal, something beautiful to commit to. It can be whatever your truth is. But then you need to also invest, and the investment part is actually putting in the work and then building skills in service of that greater ideal. And I think the boyos that we've been working with, this is what we're mainly focusing on. Of course, nail down your purpose and then find the right project to commit to. But then also when you invest, what do you need in order to make progress? And it can be something about resolving your inner anxiety. It can be about building skills. For example, with storytelling, we talk a lot about storytelling and persuasion, how to become more influential. Right. So I guess my final thoughts are, when you feel the darkness closing in, well, maybe you can join the boyos and then find refuge in in a place where darkness cannot really go, which is the objective heavenly realm of beauty. I guess those would be my final thoughts.
That's very poetic. I love it, man. I love it. Is that what you came down when I was there in attacking the Jargon Knights in Helm's Deep, and you came down with this prophecy? Is that what's going on? You said, Steph, no, you've become insane and ideological. Come down with the prophecy of the heavenly boyos and the beings of light. I'm watching now. I think we should rewatch that movie and see what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. We'll make it a boyo evening.
Sweet. So there you go, people. There's Laszlo. Laszlo's a good chap, and by all means, pop over to the other channel, check out the second part, and you will rip into it more, and we'll talk to you over there. And stay juicy. Try not to get possessed by any specters of jargon and evil stuff, and we'll talk to you later. Bye bye. All right, sweet dude.
I think you're still recording. We can just cut it off.
Sweet dude. Oh, thank God we got rid of those motherfuckers. Thank God they're not watching anymore. Let's pitch about Oh my God.
Can we finally talk about the New York Times?
Yes.